pero las preguntas nos las vas a hacer, ¿no?
Sí, os voy a hacer
vale,
las preguntas. Sí.
Que si no, no me acuerdo.
Buenos días. Good morning. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming here, and for the Spanish Ministry of Ecological Transition for hosting us so very graciously today here in Sharm el Sheikh. Cofidis is the Spanish national asset management company that manages assets on behalf of the Spanish government and other third countries, with a double focus. Firstly, to promote Spanish promoters in their internationalization processes abroad, so it's focused to the private sector, first hint of the session. And secondly, it is also very keen in supporting sustainable development. So there's a second main topic of this great panel we're hosting: development, private sector and development. And the title of this panel is Climate Finance for Private Sector Development. We all know that in terms of the financial deficit, the financial lag, in order for developing and developed nations to comply with the Paris Agreement Accord, there is a substantial lag in terms of financing. We're speaking of trillions, in the tune of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 trillions of a funding gap yearly. And both multilateral stakeholders and development finance institutions have a strong role to play as catalyzers and as standard setters for private sector development. So that is the first, or the context in which we want to focus our first panel today, which is comprised of which has the following participants: Maria Shobaragan, which is the Director of Lending in Africa, Caribbean, the Pacific and Asia of the European Investment Bank; Marta Mulas, which is a board member for the Green Climate Fund; and lastly, Edgardo Alvarez, which is the Secretary General of ALIDA, the Latin American Association of Development Finance Institutions. So let's begin with Maria, if you don't mind. Maria, as I said, is the head of the lending department in the EIB outside the European Union. She's a veteran of the EIB. I've known her for over 15, 20 years in various capacities, both of ourselves. And as I said, she leads the effort of finding operations and doing the structuring them outside the European Union. In terms of technology transfer, Europe is a global leader in green technologies developed by private sector institutions. How does the EIB support technology transfer to build to third countries that can benefit from this expertise to be successful in transition to a low carbon and climate resilient economy? What are your thoughts on what has the EIB do in terms of technology transfer and development of the private sector in partner countries?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much for having me here today. It's really a pleasure to be at the Spanish pavilion at the COP. It's important to remember that this is the COP of implementation. So it is action by action, one at a time. So it's not the big announcements that we are going to be seeing these days, but it is really showing how we are interiorizing the commitments of the different countries and the commitments in Paris, and how we are implementing each one of those. So your question very much comes relevant in this sense. I represent, you were very clear, the European Investment Bank, and I cover Africa, Asia, and Latin America, plus the Caribbean and the Pacific. But you know, those, it's just a technicality. So, well, this is not a technicality. We do a lot in the Caribbean and in the Pacific, but they are part of the regions. I shouldn't be saying that. And on your question, we lend both public sector and private sector. And we have a geographical footprint equivalent to the one of the World Bank. So hence all of these regions that we are covering. And very often when we are lending to the public sector is the enabling infrastructure for the private sector to then be able to carry out their investments and to bring prosperity, poverty alleviation, and very often actions that are against climate change. So in this context, what specifically are we doing? We committed already in 2019, and it was at a COP that we did this, that we would have from 2021, 100% of our activities would be Paris aligned. And this we have done already. This means that we have stopped doing certain types of investments that we were doing in the past. And for us, fossil fuels are completely out of the question in terms of what we can support. We know that this is now sometimes controversial, but because we are a long-term investment bank, we want to make sure that we are not investing in what will necessarily be stranded assets. So 100% Paris aligned. Second, we have committed that at least 50% of all our activity, be it inside the Union or outside the European Union, will be dedicated to climate action and environment sustainability. And this by 2025, but we are very close to getting to this. And let's keep in mind that our total lending every year is between 60 and 70 billion euro. So it's not a small amount that we're talking about when we say that at least 50% is going to be climate action or environmental sustainability, and the rest is Paris aligned. And the last point that we committed was that by 2030, we would have mobilized 1 trillion euro of investment for climate. And we're on track for this. So in terms of technology transfer, we have the advantage that the European Union is particularly well placed, and European companies are particularly well placed in terms of the technology. And there are many countries, emerging economies and developing countries, that are interested in the knowledge that we have in the European Union. To be very specific, we are discussing with India about offshore wind. It is a topic that for them is extremely important. We are discussing about it with Brazil as well. And the European Union is leading in terms of the technology of offshore wind. So we can accompany European companies that are willing to invest in these countries in this, what is cutting edge for them. In Europe, what is now cutting edge is the floating offshore wind. And there, the European Investment Bank is also very active. And let me just mention another area, because it's something that we are discussing now in many of the panels, and it is green hydrogen. And green hydrogen, not only the production of green hydrogen, but also upstream, the research and development on how to have better, more efficient and cheaper electrolyzers. Again, Europe is leading on this. Yeah. We are unfortunately not leading on solar panels. It is another part of the world that is leading on solar panels, but we will be supporting the manufacturing of solar panels in a diversification of supply of solar panels. And on windmills, Europe is very, very well placed. Spanish companies are also very well placed. And then it is very, we are very happy to be able to support and encourage these activities. But also let's keep in mind in green hydrogen, the downstream. So the use of green hydrogen, be it for green steel, green fertilizers, synthetic fuels. And here again, the European Union is leading. And with the EIB, we can work with companies inside the Union and then help them in their expansion outside the European Union. And what I see is that there is a lot of demand for this. Fortunately, European Union is still seen as a leader in terms of technological innovation. And we have almost a duty, because the question of climate action is not just to solve it inside the European Union. We need to solve it globally. We have a duty to make this technology transfer, and the European Investment Bank is very happy to contribute.
Fantastic, thank you very much, Maria. Yes, and I agree with you completely on green hydrogen. And here in this region, we have a lot of experiences and pilot initiatives, being funded by Middle Eastern countries, which are quite significant and would also, converge in the direction of decreasing costs of technology. But it's always good to know that the EIB is going to support the European business and industries, especially the particular ones, if I may say. And yes, I agree with you and I think that's very interesting what you raised. If I may just pick your brain a little bit concerning the 50% objective of green finance. How is it going? How do you see it evolving in the future, and what can the rest of public and private long-term financiers apply those same metrics?
So it is progressing very well, and there is a lot of demand. What there is right now, or since February, a risk in the horizon that derives from the effects of this dreadful war that we have in Ukraine. And it is that some people might be tempted to put the climate commitments a little bit, to the back of their minds because there is a more pressing energy supply issue right now. But we need to keep in mind that if we do not act on climate now, afterwards it's going to be too late and much more expensive. So in this sense, it is important that we don't lose sight of the end game that we are aiming for, because there will always be this type of disruptive circumstances. We had COVID, now we have the war in Ukraine. So we need to address the consequences of the war in Ukraine, but at the same time, in terms of the long-term investments, continue looking at climate action and environmental sustainability with everything that this entails as well, biodiversity, protection of nature, and all of these aspects. And what we do see, and in now talking about developing countries and emerging economies, is that they are realizing that the green economy is an opportunity for them. So it's not a question of do I go green or do I have economic prosperity. The only way to have economic prosperity, particularly because of the effects of climate change, is to have a greener economy. And many more countries are realizing this, and therefore it is an opportunity for all of us to contribute in this sense.
Fantastic, thank you very much, Maria. And now over to Marta Mulas. Marta is, as I said, a board member of the Green Climate Fund. She's a senior expert at the Spanish Treasury. She's a colleague and a friend of mine, so that is always a plus. And Marta has had a long and extensive experience in the IMF. She was in the Spanish chair at the IMF. And, well, she's, as I said, she's an expert on multilateral finance and institutions. Marta, let's go back to the Green Climate Fund, if you don't mind, and especially its private sector approach. Obviously, the Green Climate Fund is more geared towards public sector operations. It is natural, it is logical, and yet private sector represents around 20% of the total number of projects in the portfolio, between 20 and 35%. That's numbers I have. Is the Green Climate Fund envisaging to channeling more funding into the private sector, through direct investments, climate infrastructure projects, project finance, green bonds, etc.? What ideas can you share concerning that approach?
So thank you, Rafa. So first of all, I would like to thank and ask Maria. I'm very pleased to be today here at the COP, at this COP of the implementation, which indeed I think is very relevant. And I want to highlight that the funds like the GCF, the Green Climate Fund, has a quite relevant role on implementation, because it's to put commitments into action, into funds, into projects. So I'm very pleased to be here. As a GCF board member, I'm representing Spain, but I must say also Ireland and New Zealand. And at the board level, we do push a lot for private sectors. I'm very pleased to be invited in this panel by Cofides, particularly as Cofides is one of the accredited entities, one of the international accredited entities. And Cofides, I do know that by heart that they done quite a big effort to be accredited, and I'm very pleased that they are thinking about the GCF in every issue they consider. So coming back to the private sector, the Green Climate Fund plays a lot of importance on the private sector. Indeed, you already raised some numbers of that it represents 20% in terms of projects. It goes up to 35% in terms of amount. And I'm going to give you even in terms of which kind of funds they get, resources, in terms of guarantees, equity, loans, and grants. Most of it is loans, so it's 55%, but on grants it's up to also 13%. So it also plays a lot of importance on blended finance. So as you can see, the Green Climate Funds plays a lot of importance to the private sector. And indeed, this is embedded on the Green Climate Fund. Even at the beginning, on the governing instrument, which is the main document, which when the Green Climate Fund was created, already states that the Green Climate Fund will have a private sector facility, which will enhance the role of the private sector. I must say in two ways, like bringing the private sector, the capital, to the climate investment projects, but also enhancing investment projects led by the private sector into the ground in developing countries. on so as you can see, the Green Climate Fund places a lot of importance on the private sector since the beginning, and indeed, even though it has already incorporated that level of importance since the beginning, on the current strategy has even increased. Already the current strategy, which goes until 2023, highlight that the Green Climate Fund should increase the resource mobilization to private sector, and should be increased the amount of the allocation to the private sector to up to more than 20%, which was more or less what was reached on the previous replenishment process. So as you can see, the Green Climate Fund is really trying to increase its relationship, and either by attracting more climate, more climate finance from the private sector, but also more projects which are being presented by the private sector, and indeed the Secretariat, which at the end of the day is going to be implementing this strategy, already envisages that on 2023 the relationship and the number of projects will be keep on increasing. Indeed, it has been already increasing. And indeed, at the board level, we, particularly me as board member, been pushing for this to happen, to push for private sector projects, because I guess we all agree on that we do need the private sector to be involved. With the public sector, it's not going to be enough. We need the public and the private sector to be implementing projects in developing countries, and also it's had a really great importance to catalyze other projects. So it's not just about funding one private project in one specific country. That's what is going to go beyond that after what the Climate Fund is doing in that country. So as I said, the work plan for 2023 already envisages that the Green Climate Fund will be presented at about 7 to 12 new projects proposed by private sector, which will amount around, this is an estimation, and I hope from the Secretariat, from 600 to 1 billion US dollars, so which is quite a large amount. And also by focusing also to enhance more blending finance, using more guarantees, more innovative instruments, which also is quite relevant. So yeah, as you can see, the Green Climate Fund is still trying to focus more on the private sector, and as myself and at the Green Climate Fund board, I'm pushing for it, and I hope it will continue and it will reach its goal as set in the current strategy.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Marta. I think what you said is makes a lot of sense from a financial point of view also, you know? And I certainly hope that the private sector or the attention or the availability of funding for financeable and bankable private sector projects are taken into consideration. And I think it will be a good success story to sell from the point of view of the Green Climate Fund, if I believe. Also, if I just ask you a little extra question, and since we're in Africa, can you tell us a little bit about the reality of the geographical scope of the activities of the fund at the moment? What sort of messages can we say to projects in Africa, for instance?
So, the Green Climate Fund, it has a mandate to cover all the developed countries, but particularly to the vulnerable ones. So the ones who are more it's more, as I say, more vulnerable to climate change. And the way the GCF understand it, it's focusing particularly on African low-income countries and small and developing islands. But I must say it's not only those, and indeed I'm kind of one of the board members that is really highlight that this is including. So only country which is considered to be vulnerable should be kind of one of the main targets, particularly for adaptation. So I would like to highlight that the Green Climate Fund focus its action on mitigation and adaptation. The current strategy set that target in equal footing, so 50% to mitigation, 50% for adaptation. I must say, as we are talking 50% for adaptation, I must say, as we are talking for the private sector, it's easier to bring in the private sector to mitigation activities. For adaptation, it's not that easy, but we are still increasing, and indeed the Secretariat for the 2023 is hoping to increase the number of adaptation projects related to the private sector. And on that note, we are the fund is focusing on to enhance the tools that they do have to bring more adaptation projects into the private sector, like using specific tools that we do have with on the readiness programs, which incentivize the role of the private sector, which are more like a close engagement with the national designated authorities, which are the authorities based in those developing countries who are engaged with the GCF and understand which are the pipeline to be aware that the projects presented by the Green Climate Fund are aligned with their national plans and with their strategy. So it's quite relevant also by the project sector facility, project facility, which also helps the accredited entities and also the countries to bring projects easily, to bring projects which are related, are relevant for the GCF, including private sector projects. And finally, also on the accreditation side, we're also enhancing the role of the direct access entities, which also have a quite relevant importance to bring adaptation, as they are more in the field, so they do know which are the needs of each country. So we are enhancing the role, and also we just approved a pilot program which is called a specific project accreditation, which will allow for some entities which are not accredited at the Green Climate Fund to bring innovative projects in developing countries, particularly in areas which doesn't, there is no any specific project in that country. So as you can see, there are many tools to bring more private sector, also an adaptation, which is one of the goals, and in all over the developing countries, but focusing, as I say, particular adaptation on those vulnerable countries to climate change.
Fantastic, thank you very much, Marta. And now to Edgardo. Last but not least, my good friend Eduardo, who is the Secretary General of ALIDE. ALIDE is the Association of Latin American Development Finance Institutions. And Edgardo, well, what to say about him? No, he is also a veteran in the world of multilateral and development finance investing and financing. He was the CEO of many public development banks and entities in Peru. And he's a good friend of ours. So thank you, Edgardo, for coming. And let's talk a little bit about Latin America and opportunities. According to the World Bank, Latin America is responsible for around 10% of global emissions. Well, Brazil obviously being the highest net emitter. And agricultural sector poses challenges in terms of deforestation in land use and changes in land use. It accounts for a big chunk of emissions. Also, transportation, electricity, energy, well, you know, the main topics. How does ALIDE identify opportunities in those areas for both economic growth and supporting services with lower emissions? And what is the role played by the private sector in these opportunities in Latin America? Edgardo, what can you tell us about that?
Okay, thank you first for the invitation and to be here, because as you know, COFIDE is a beloved member of ALIDE as well as the Bay. So we are a really nice and good family for development in our region. And regarding to your question, let me show you some figures about the lack of infrastructure we need in Latin America. It's normally known that between 4 and 5% of the GDP in Latin America must be invested in order to solve the lack of infrastructure we have there. If you have a scope in different parts, for example, in water and sanitary, energy and transport and telecommunications, more than $2.2 trillion are needed in order to maintain and expand the necessary infrastructure we do need in Latin America. And 59% of this must be allocated in new infrastructure, and 49% must be allocated in replacement of the assets of the existing infrastructure. It's not normally that you don't do it in a good way in our region. To close the gap in access to maintaining water and sanitary services, including wastewater treatment, we will need to invest an average of 0.5% of our region's GDP, equivalent of less than $400 billion. if you want to, we need to invest in the electricity sector in order to provide universally access to electricity to the entire population. We need to invest at least almost 600 billion US dollars. It means almost 8.8% of our LAC GDP. For the transport sector, closing infrastructure gaps in the road, airport, and public transports, you need to invest almost 1 trillion billions US dollars. And for increase the household connectivity through the use of 4G broadband and mobile internet technologies, we need to invest at least 300 billion. So it means that all the regions need to raise at least 3.12% of its GDP by 2030. So the need of investment from the private sector is necessary. Regarding to the agriculture, we know that the population is growing. So we need more food. It's obvious.
Yeah.
You have for a minute. So what we can do? Okay, stop the growth of the population is very difficult, because if not, we are going to have some problems with who will pay the the pension of the people, and there are some countries that will have this problem. So you must increase the size the land for agriculture and these things. So if you increase the land, you may have problems with deforestation, and this is something that we don't want. So the solution goes to increase the productivity of the land. And this is the way that even the OECD foresees that for an annual growth of 1.2% of the global demand, 87% of the increase of the world will come from productivity increases. So this is something that we must work, and for that there are a lot of new technology in the agricultural sector, like the agrotech. But the problem is how you get to these new technologies to the small and poorest part of our populations, because you must realize that they don't have water supply at home, they don't have electricity, they don't even have internet. So the problem is that we must invest in, you must see the world think in order to solve these problems, no? And for all these reasons, it's not surprising that the green bond issues in Latin America have doubled over the past 2 years, no? I can show you in 2019 they were 13 billion, and now they are almost 30 billions. And that's why we in ALIDE, we are really interested in agriculture, and we are going to have on next month in November the 7th Agricultural World Congress with others, the Agricultural Regional Association from Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Europe, and we will meet in Morelia. And we really want you to be there, no? For such a interesting event. I don't know if you want to yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Edgardo. And yes, I do believe also that the potential of Latin American economies and the development of private sector is enormous. And you know, from a purely Spanish perspective, it is one of the main areas and markets in which we would like, you know, our companies, our institutions, to further collaborate together and to further, create opportunities for value that at the end of the day are going to be beneficial for the development of Latin American societies. I'm sticking with you, since you were the last one in the order. I'm going to ask you another question, if you don't mind. And yes, I remember at Curaçao at the beginning of the year, in your General Assembly, there were a lot of we're talking about the challenges and a lot of initiatives that were being presented by ALIDE and its main partners. Now, I remember a very interesting one concerning carbon credits and the development of a private carbon credit market in Latin America, and just was one of the examples of the challenges ahead. What, in your opinion, is the main challenge that your institution members, Alides's members, are facing in private sector climate finance? And how are they addressing this challenge? Be it market barriers, capacity barriers, policy barriers. Where do you think that we should put the accent, or your members should, or constituents should put the onus of the proof?
Okay, you know, for us to see the development banks, I'd like to see like the Marines. You know, the Marines are the ones who has to go to get the hill, and you are affected to the crossfire, to everybody. So there is a big challenge that we face in Latin America and the development banks also. And for this, they work a lot in order to don't let nobody behind. And in Alide also we have a program with the GCF. We are a delivery partner. We are working on enhancing climate finance and investment in Latin American banking system. We have talked with 6 different countries from Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, República Dominicana, Cuba, and Guatemala, in order to how to help them, the development banks and the private banks, in order to get to be accredited by the GCF. That we know that is very difficult. It's a very difficult thing to get. So we're working on this to help our development banks for this. No? And obviously all the banks in Latin America, they have a lot of programs in order to work for the poorest. I can mention a lot of these programs, but for example, we have in Costa Rica digital platforms, or we have in Mexico support to the SMEs, or the fintech new channels with the BNDES. So almost all the development banks from Latin America have one program in order to get on this, and always trying to get involved to the private sector, because we know that the money from development banks as well as the multilaterals is not enough. And this is something that we must talk in all the meetings in the D20 LTIC. You say, okay, we need more money. How to invest? We attract the private sector to invest in infrastructure, and this is something that we work a lot on that.
Thank you very much, Edgardo. Marta, back to you, if you don't mind. And this is a question that is also very dear to long-term financiers such as the EIB and Cofidis. And it has to do with how to crowd in private capital and crowd in private sector funding. What is the main Green Climate Fund strategy for unlocking private sector financing and allowing for capital to crowd in low emission and climate resilient projects? What are your ideas on that? What can you tell us? What are you doing?
Okay, now, thank you. So, Rafa, I'm very pleased that you're asking that, because we just approved just recently, last board, not the one before, the private sector strategy, which is something that me as board member representing Spain, Ireland, and New Zealand have been advocating a lot. I think it is quite relevant that the GCF does have a private sector strategy. It wasn't really expected, but it took quite a long time, but finally we have it. And it's quite relevant to understand to the private sector what the Green Climate Fund can do for them. Where are the ways that they're going to attract the private sector project and also attract climate finance as well? Because as I said, the Green Climate Fund do co-finance a lot, and indeed, in terms of co-financing, the ratio with the private sector financing is much higher. In terms of whenever we have a private sector project, we reach the co-financing level is much higher than when we do have it a public sector project. So coming back to this strategy is embedded in the current strategy. So it just follow what was the first lines that on the private sector strategy was included on the strategic plan, which is currently implementing. And this strategy is focused in 4 areas. So first one is on the environment. So as I said, the Green Climate Fund wants to incentivize an environment which helps the private sector to invest in developing countries. And through this readiness program, through other tools that do have. So this is kind of the one side. Another focus is on innovative projects. The private sectors the Green Climate Fund wants to focus on projects which are innovative, which bring something new to the project's portfolio. So this is one of the focus of the current strategy. The third one is on the issue of enhancing the financial markets on the regional and national level. So this is also quite relevant for the Green Climate Fund, and indeed, the Green Climate Fund has also a role to enhance these financial markets on the ground, on the projects. On these countries, most of them, they don't have financial market developed in terms of the green bonds or green issuance. So it's also relevant. The Green Climate Fund does have a say on that. So let me just grab for the last one. Oh, and also, of course, and the most, I will say the most relevant one, which is the risking. As I said, we understand that the Green Climate Fund has a strong role to enhance blending finance with the climate, with the private sector. The risking is really, we see as a way to enhance the private sector. The private sector sometimes, the risk is too high to engage to this kind of projects, and the Green Climate Fund can bring with the different financial instrument that does have to enhance the private sector to invest on those projects which could be difficult in specific countries or in specific sectors on specific kind of projects. So those are the 4 axes for the private sector strategy, which we just approved. And now we're going to go to a more implemented side, so that we're going to have a specific plan, which is going to be presented hopefully soon, to which actions we're going to take place to deliver and to bring this private sector strategy into action and to deliver and to bring more projects into the ground. So this is the main strategy, and I hope it will be implemented as soon as possible.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Marta. And I completely agree, particularly when it comes to de-risking and credit enhancement. And also that takes into account a lot of debates that are going around right now with respect to the system of Bretton Woods, credit worthiness, credit quality of capital, use additionality in terms of climate finance, and so on and so on. So it's a very, very big issue at the moment, and I agree with you entirely. And speaking about also de-risking and credit enhancement, the EIB does a fantastic work on that. Now they are among the front runners and pioneers in Europe in the correct implementation of blending instruments in order to accelerate the green transition. No? And Maria, if you don't mind, as your president said a few weeks ago, Werner Hoyer, he said, well, I don't know the quote by heart. I'm reading it, so don't think don't think I'm such an expert on Mr. Hoyer. But he said something which resonates quite profoundly, which is we now have no choice but to adapt at a much faster pace than we thought to a planet that is becoming hotter and harsher. That is why the European Investment Bank will triple its global adaptation finance by 2025 to help Europe and its partners. My question to you, Maria, on what Werner Hoyer said. How is the EIB going to accelerate green transformation, not only in Europe, but in third countries, such as the European partners in Africa, and particularly in adaptation finance? Let me pick your brain a little bit on that.
Thank you. And I appreciate the question, because it's true that when you talk to African leaders, what they're interested in is more adaptation than mitigation. They are not the ones that are the main emitters globally, but the African continent is the continent that is already suffering most out of climate change. So, and I know, in Spain we've had a tough summer, we have drought, but the level of poverty that climate change is bringing in Africa is really something that you need to go there and see, and how it's a question of loss of lives, but loss of livelihoods as well, that is really bringing some countries backwards compared to the progress that they had made. So talking and engaging on climate adaptation with African continents, it's a priority for all of us. And in this sense, at the European Investment Bank, what we have done is we are looking at the climate risk of every single project that we finance. There's no project, there's two areas that we call it mainstreamed into everything that we do. One is the gender angle. We look at how every project is affecting women and girls differently from men and boys, and making sure that there is a particular benefit for women and girls. But the second area is this infrastructure climate adapted? Because climate change is here and it's affecting all of us already. And we need to make sure that we are not making any investment that is not prepared for that future that unfortunately now is going to be inevitable. So then talking to African leaders, it's very much about soil erosion, which then comes very close with the issue of sustainable agriculture, and right now the question of food security, which is a major worry for African leaders. But it is also the management of water. And again, in Spain, we know very well the issues of water, lack of water, and conflicts that this can bring. So management of water when there is too much water and when there is little water, and in any case, a precious natural resource, is an area that we are working a lot. So we have many projects that are about access to clean water, but also waste management or wastewater management. And here, also linking with the urban environment, we need to make sure Africa is going to have many of the mega cities of the future. And we need to make sure that these cities that are being built now are good for humans to live in and good for economies to thrive in. And they have to be climate adapted from the beginning. So the whole question of climate adaptation is very much one of also inequalities, because it is always the most vulnerable, the ones that will suffer the most. And let me just finish with one example. Whenever there are floods, if you look at the statistics, there are more women that die than men. Yeah. And one would wonder, I said, why is this? And it's because the men can run and they can go. The women are the ones that are staying behind, having to take care of the children and the elderly. So they are the ones that are caught. They're always the ones that are most vulnerable. So it's all related, and the question of inequality comes very much into adaptation.
Oh, exactly. And from the point of view of a financing institution, which you represent and you do, I completely agree with you, because in terms of mitigation versus adaptation, mitigation is, it's sexier to finance mitigation projects, and we are sometimes losing focus on the fact that regions such as Africa, what they need or what they crave in terms of capital expenditure and amount of and impact at the end of the day is adaptation projects in wastewater, water treatment. And I agree with you on your reflection that the fight against climate change, particularly in terms of finance, is going to be mostly fought in cities, which is, the missing middle is mostly found in the cities and around the cities. So I think you're totally correct in that sense. Marta, Edgardo, Maria, I would love to continue chatting with you. Yeah. You have been fantastic panelists, but I suspect we have three other people that want to jump in on your couches. So thank you very much. Please let's give them a hand, and we'll pause for 2 minutes and reconvene in 2 minutes. Thank you very much. Hello, good afternoon. Good morning in Spain, I suspect. Yes, good morning in Spain. We begin the second panel of this session, which we have called Climate Finance for Private Sector Development. And the second panel we're going to focus it on international climate finance, the role of the financial sector and the transformations that are needed, and on success cases and lessons learned by financial institutions and by large corporates. So with that we have Elena Viñes, which is from the Spanish Markets Authority, Tony Vallabriga, the head of responsible banking at BBVA, and José Luis Blanco, the chief of the CSO of Acciona, which is one of the largest Spanish conglomerates. Elena, let's begin with you. Elena, firstly, follow a short introduction. Elena, as you know, is the commissioner in the Spanish Financial Markets Authority, rapporteur to the Sustainable Platform of the European Union. She's one of the leading experts on taxonomy. There's hardly anyone in Spain that knows more about taxonomy than her. I had the privilege of working with her on a number of files, particularly you remember gas and the nuclear. Let's bring the ugly children first. Let's get them out of the way. And Elena always helps us in every forum in which she can do, and she's a good friend of ours. And thank you very much, Elena, for having you here. And let's talk a little bit about the role of the financial sector and decarbonization in the financial sector. And let's focus a little bit on the taxonomy. Obviously, the target of the taxonomy and all of the regulation that is being developed in Europe is to incentivize investment that is sustainable, and also to avoid market fragmentation. Now, Tony knows it. From a financial point of view. From a technical point of view, José Luis knows it. In the world of sustainable finance, we're talking about many things. They are close, but they are different. There's a lot of a certain level of market gaps and market fragmentation. And in that sense, how is the taxonomy strengthening the role of the financial sector in financing the transition to a low carbon economy? And how will taxonomy allow us, or allow companies and financiers, to have access to more sources of financing at a lower cost? Cheaper capital at the end of the day.
Yes.
Elena, if you can, please.
Yes, thank you. And it's a real pleasure to be with all of you today. Rafael, just to make it much more dynamic, because whenever we talk about the taxonomy, just to start, the name taxonomy is just slightly, I have to admit that I had to look it up the first time that as what exactly means, which means basically it's a scientific classification, and for a lot of people it's a classification, a list of activities that can be deemed to be sustainable under certain circumstances, and for many others it is also a reporting tool, right? And some would argue that it is quite a heavy reporting tool. However, and you just said it, the real purpose of the taxonomy is to mobilize capital flows towards sustainable investments. And I think that to make it much more tangible and easier to understand, let's put an example, And I have two excellent partners in crime today in this panel to make it. So let's imagine José Luis does not work for Acciona and actually is the CEO of a company. It's a utility company. It has two plants, power plants, and none of them meet the taxonomy requirement, right? Because one is powered with coal, the other one, let's say, with gas, But José Luis, which is very bold, and engaged CEO, it has drafted a transition plan and has committed to net zero, right? So in his transition plan, he's going to halve emissions by 2030 and then become net zero by 2050, in line with the IPCC, a scenario that was going to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees with limited and no overshoot. Now, what, in fact, on his transition plan, on the details, what he's going to do is, let's start with my first plant, and I'm going to upgrade it, and I'm going to make it, align with the taxonomy. Well, all the money that José Luis is going to invest in that plan can be considered taxonomy aligned from a CapEx perspective. And what becomes more interesting is that he can then go to Tony to the BBVA and ask for a green loan or ask to issue a green bond, and that green bond or green loan would be 100% taxonomy aligned. Now, what is that interest? On its own, we've seen how much the demand for green financial instruments has been in the market. But what we haven't even started seeing is how much it will even grow in the near future, because Tony knows that that green bond will be really well placed in the market. But what he also knows is that, having giving a loan to or a bond to Jose Luis is going to increase his own taxonomy alignment that he has to report, and he's engaged on having a good green asset ratio. But it goes one step farther, because the European market, the asset management market, today is 50% ESG or green. What that means in terms of the taxonomy, it means that half of the European market in terms of assets is going to have to report on the taxonomy alignment of their portfolios, both in terms of revenues and capex. And if you are a financial market participant and you are selling your portfolios as ESG or green, you want to show that it has a high percentage of alignment. Now, what is also very interesting with the taxonomy is that until now, the green finance world was surely dominated by revenues. So Jose Luis had no chance whatsoever in a green fund because his revenues today are 0% taxonomy aligned. But now with the capex, imagine that he's investing 80% of the capex into transforming that plan. He is actually becoming very attractive for both in the equity and on the general purpose, corporate bonds. And you can see how the whole machinery is starting to operate. The last point I would make is that for the very first time since the 2nd of August, the average citizen, European citizen, can for the first time align their values with, their investments with their values. Because now, when you go to the bank, you go again to BBVA and you say, I have some savings, I would love to invest them. They are going to have to ask you whether or not you have sustainability preferences. And of the 3 options they're going to give you, one is based on the taxonomy, and the taxonomy becomes the clear variable that drives green investment. So hope that I have explained a little bit, how it works. Yet, we haven't yet seen that in place because all the different pieces of this big puzzle that we call the sustainable finance package is being put in place. But and you can quote me on this, in 2 or 3 years, we're going to see how much, the demand for taxonomy aligned in revenues and capex, grows in the market.
Thank you very much, Elena. And look, I am relieved because I also was I was working on the taxonomy regulation, and the first time they gave me the file, I wondered if I was the only one that had looked in the dictionary what taxonomy meant. So I'm glad that at least there's 2 of us. And also in taxonomy, Jose Luis knows quite a lot. He was also a member of the EU platform. Did you look it up in the dictionary as well, Jose Luis?
I think that the first time that we were at the commission talking about this, I think all of us were in the same position, learning.
Fantastic, yes. No, Jose Luis, since we're with you at the moment, obviously from a financial point of view, and Cofides and BBVA, they were partners with Acciona in most of or some of the operations that they do outside of Spain, and we know very well how much all the drive and all the passion and how well you do and you implement and you manage ESG metrics within your team and within Acciona as a whole. And frankly, it is one of the main Spanish companies that have a most comprehensive framework in managing and structuring their operations in terms of ESG metrics, sustainability metrics, KPIs, etc., etc. And I would like to ask you, Jose Luis, what are the key climate risks and opportunities for Acciona as a global civil engineering and concessionary holding company? Tell us about projects in Africa, Latin America, that you are particularly proud of and in which you have made a significant impact. guide us through a little bit on the things that you're proud of the work you have done.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, first of all. I wonder how many of you believe that we become net zero in 2050. How many of you thinks that we will become net zero in 2050? Okay, not so much.
Or even before.
We do it. We do it. We believe. And you can hear that there's huge amount of investment behind this impulse. This is the view of Acciona. If you are seeing the market and you see that there's a huge opportunity behind the transition to net zero, why not we create a new sector only focused on transition? And if you see Acciona, you will see in the renewable energy, pure renewable operator. We are in the clean transportation, clean water desalination, or we are manufacturing wind turbines, or our first electric car will be on the street in 6 months. We are challenging every single sector in order to transform or to spot the decarbonized version of this sector. But what is the problem? Why other companies are not seeing this? Because you have the need, you have the target, and you have all the impulse of different financial institutions trying to feed this transformation. The problem is that they are not so much greenfield developers. The problem is the balance sheet. And the beauty of Acciona is that we lever our balance sheet on renewables for 25 years, and with this lever, you can balance your balance sheet in order to give safety harbor to the financial institutions. And for us, this is an opportunity. This is not the risk. Taking into account the taxonomy is a very good roadmap in order to identify in which sectors these opportunities will become a success. And this is the value proposition of Acciona. See that the transition gives you the opportunity to transform your company in a new sector company that is the decarbonization.
Oh, fantastic, José Luis. And also from a governance point of view, you're one of the pioneer companies in Europe in what refers to integrating the financial side and the sustainability side under the same division, under the same unit. And in that case, can you please share with us what you told me a few days ago or a few weeks ago concerning your sustainable finance goals, the fact that sustainability linked loans are a big part in your financing of operations. Can we pick your brain a little bit on that? What can you tell us about that experience?
Yeah, this is very, for us, it was a huge opportunity to see the market because we are very intense in capital as a company. But the problem is that the current green bonds or the current principles that we are using for issuing this kind of instruments are a little bit weak. And if you see the market, 1 in 4 euros that we have invested last year in Europe were green. And where is the impact? Where is the impact? We were thinking about how to offer to the financial institutions an extra, and we developed a sustainability-linked loans and bonds framework, and also in the green bonds, extra impact feature in every single loan that we are asking for. And I think that is the next generation of this financial instrument will be part of the what are you doing with the money, the use of proceeds, with the taxonomy aligned, and also a piece of impact on the specific project to get the most of this project. And this is the philosophy of Acciona. We get 5 billion in this moment using this mixed impact and taxonomy alignment instruments in our financial instruments.
Fantastic, José Luis. No, and that's a very ambitious objective, and it's. I think it shows a lot of clear and conscious efforts of where Acciona should be headed, and that's something that from my point of view, from a financier, it's something that's quite positive, to have that amount of engagement from clients. And I think also Tony might have something to say about that. Now, let's go a little bit back to the financing side. And I think that a few months ago, Tony, you published your third TCFD report. So obviously BBVA is very big on disclosure. It was named one of the Sustainable Bank of Europe last year by, I can't remember which outfit it was, but you're in the game. You're doing very interesting things from a point of view of a financier and from an accredited entity. And let's go a little bit more to the ground. BBVA, as you know, is a global bank. It operates all throughout Latin America, Spain, with a very distinct funding strategy in each country, which sort of immunizes it as a whole. And what can you tell us globally as a group? What are the main transition and physical risks that you see on your portfolio and all the countries and geographies in which you operate?
No. Can you hear me? Well, okay. No, great to be here, and thanks for the invitation. Well, we see climate change and sustainability as a big business opportunity, no? As José said, no? For banking, it's probably the biggest business opportunity in the decade. But let's start with the risk, okay? Then we can comment later about the opportunity side. So coming back to your question. Well, we did, obviously we released our third TCFD report just a few months ago. And as we said there, we consider obviously that we have transition risk, physical risk, following the taxonomy that is being defined. We see in terms of transition risk, we see obviously technological risk in certain sectors that are quite relevant, obviously. Disruptive technologies that will be the winners of the new economy, so we have to take into account what our clients are doing on that. Also, we see obviously the regulatory risk on the transition side, a growing legal risk and reputational risk also on transition. We see on the news a lot coming, and also some specific steps done recently in Europe, no, or even in UK, no, around advertising. So we see obviously market sentiments evolving. So transition risk plays a key part, and also physical risk because of a footprint. We have. Let's remind that we have 2/3 of our gross income comes from emerging countries in Latin America, in Turkey. So we see also in Spain, we see chronic risk linked to wildfire, heat waves, floods, and also acute and chronic risk. No. So how we approach to risk management? No. I would say that we consider climate and sustainability risk as a driver to embed into our risk management model. One friend of mine used to say that if you change a risk management model in a bank, you change the bank. So we are trying to embed all these new drivers into our different pieces of our risk framework, no? Starting at an appetite framework on our asset allocation, also providing new policies in terms of defining frameworks for specific sectors, including this in our annual assessment appetite in each sector, and then obviously including this into our processes, no? Into onboarding, into loan origination. All this is already being done specifically on the sectors with a higher transition and risk and physical risk, no? So this is becoming as part of our business as usual. It's a long way. Obviously, the role done by the supervisors, it helps. The thematic review and expectations was a good exercise in the last months. So that's a key point. But I will highlight two topics. One is the specific approach to transition. Elena mentioned about transition plans. No, we have to help the whole economy to transition, and so target setting is absolutely critical. We are members of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, so we have set targets for sectors covering 80% of the CO2 emissions. We are going to cover more in the near future. But the idea is to have intermediate targets that have to be embedded into our decision making. Mm-hmm. So we have to operationalize those targets to help our clients in the transition. So this is a big part of our work. And secondly, the growing relevance of non-financial risk. So it's not only a question of credit risk, market risk, but also a question about how we manage non-financial risk, especially for legal, reputation, litigation risk. So we have also a working group on that because it's absolutely critical to ensure that we do the right thing and we promote the right transition.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Tony. Yes, and I agree. And I think I especially agree with what you said about having a clear view on decarbonization pathways per sector. I think if we want to be net zero by 2050 or before, like Jose Luis said, we need to be thinking in those terms. And I'm very glad that those are the lines of thought that you're following.
Now, and let's say that the taxonomy in this sense is very helpful tool, not only to identify where we can set targets or where you can mobilize and help our clients, but also it is a great tool internally, to see how we can tack everything and understand better what would need to be done. No?
Yeah. And something that might be of interest also to you, Tony, is one question with which I'm going to attack Elena. Well, not attack. I'm going to ask you for your help. It concerns taxonomy. And you know that Cofidis, BBVA, and many other financial institutions, we are very invested with taxonomy, and we want to operate with taxonomy. However, at the end of the day, when we, for institutions such as ourselves, when we finance operations in third countries, there's a big question mark of interoperability in third markets. For instance, companies that we finance with projects, capital projects in Colombia, China, Costa Rica, Indonesia, they have their own taxonomies, they have their own regulations, they have their own energy matrices, they have their own local regulations, realities, etc. My question to you, Elena, as the leading expert on taxonomy in Spain, which I sincerely know that you are, is that how can EU companies and investors, DFIs, banks, operate outside the European market with the taxonomy in mind? What can we do in order to guarantee that international interoperability of the European taxonomy with other taxonomies and other market realities?
Thank you for the question, because if you allow me, I'm going to do a little bit of a promotion of a report that the platform, European Platform Sustainable Finance, will publish in October, a report, beautiful 200 pages, great bed night reading report, or exclusively looking at data and usability and how to improve the operability and make the taxonomy basically work. And one of the chapters, there's a full chapter dedicated to the international considerations, yeah? And I'm gonna try to summarize it very quickly for you today and not go into too much technical detail. Grossly speaking, there are two different types of barriers, yeah? Barriers in terms of making different taxonomies work. They are what we call the technical barriers, and then they are what we call the principle or more concept-based barriers. So let's look first at the technical barriers. If we really were to simplify the taxonomy, is the list of economic activities, right? And for each one, you have a set of technical criteria. So the first thing that is absolutely necessary is that all taxonomies identify the same key metric for the different environment activity and for the same environmental objective. So let's stick to climate mitigation. So for power generation, we use in the EU taxonomy grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt, but taking into account the life cycle analysis. So in order for two taxonomies to start being comparable, it is absolutely necessary that the metric is the same. So it's less important that where you set the bar. In Europe, it's 100 grams, maybe in India it's 150 in order to reflect their own pathway to net zero. But what is very important is that we are able to compare apples to apples. The second part is the classification list, right? The economic activities. So in Europe, we're using the NACE codes, which is a statistical classification. In China, they're using their own classification and so forth. So what we did, the platform worked hand in hand with the European Commission and data providers to provide what I call the translator, yeah? That translator in terms of classification systems. So a second requirement will be for all taxonomies to be translated the same, international and the same level of detail. Now, going back to the environmental metrics, I cannot stress enough how important it is, more than making it mandatory, more than anything else, that we finally have the same understanding on the key metrics and the methodologies to calculate them. Yeah? It is a little bit like in the financial world when it comes to capex or revenues, with slight tiny differences, we're all speaking the same language across the world. Well, it's about time we do the same for environmental metrics, and I would argue even for social ones, yeah? And the other point is also very important to understand is that the metric might slightly change depending on your use. So one thing is carbon intensity for a portfolio, when you want to calculate your carbon footprint. Another one is in the taxonomy when you're going to link it directly to the activity. Now, basically I'm saying translator and then what I call the international glossary, yeah? The third point on the technical barriers, it's everything, trying to avoid everything that is too local. It's a reference, to EU regulation in the case or EU labeling. I'm not saying that, we need to change the actual taxonomy, but we need, again, to translate it. So, for example, buildings, the key metric is the EPC, the Energy Performance Certificate. So what's the EPC equivalent in Japan, in the US, and so forth? And then we'll start being able to compare apples to apples. Now, let's move to the second barriers, which, can I say, they're by far more difficult to overcome, because many times they're directly linked to the purpose and the political view on the actual taxonomy. So these are what I call the ground concepts, yeah, that make the taxonomy. And one of the features unique of the taxonomy, European one, is the do no significant harm, which basically means that it's not sufficient to meet your target, your criteria for mitigation, let's say your reduction, your carbon intensity, but you also need to make sure that you're not harming the other environmental objectives. This is really important because science is telling us how interconnected the different environmental objectives are, and you cannot, on one hand, reduce emissions at the cost of biodiversity, because you're going to end up paying, yeah? So the problem we face is that there are some taxonomies out there that do not have do no significant harm, and I believe it will be very difficult in Europe to accept as sustainable an investment that is harming their objectives. And I'll finish with my last point, which is how you then, how the taxonomy translates into the regulatory framework. So for me, the key point, and it links to what we were discussing before, is that the taxonomy, yes, it's a dictionary, it's your classification list, but what makes it really interesting is that companies have to report the revenues and the capex, right? So if I ever were thinking of doing like an exchange, €1, £1, so EU taxonomy, UK taxonomy, then we will have to make sure that UK companies have to report on the revenue side and the capex side. And then we can start having that conversation of, should we make equivalences? And when a UK company says, I'm 50% revenue aligned with the UK taxonomy, we might then say, okay, we'll take that or not.
Thank you very much, Elena. So there's still hope.
There's still hope. There's always hope.
Yes. Yes, no, thank you very much, because you've saved me quite a number of headaches, because I've been hiring consultants for the last year trying to tell them to explain to me how it operates outside the European Union, and they haven't been as bright or concise as you have been for the last 5 minutes. So thank you very much. Jose Luis, back to you. And let's talk about a favorite subject of ours, which is Scope 3 and, and supply chains. Well, obviously Acciona, as a Spanish, well, as one of the main Spanish companies, in terms of your supply chain management, which is complex, spreads out through a number of countries, continents, sectors, and you place purchasing orders in the billions. I want to ask you, how do you engage with Scope 3 and supply chain and purchasing materials and supplies and so on in order to, and how do you manage ESG risks in that particular line of the business? What can you tell us of your experience about that?
Thank you. First of all, I want to refer to the taxonomy internationally adopted. I think that all of the European companies who are reporting with the taxonomy of the European format has the same challenge, and we are tackling with the challenge that we are reporting activities in 30 countries. Yeah. And we have the NACE challenge, we have the threshold, the do no significant harm, and if we, as the Europeans, has the previous experience, why not the other financial authorities around the world can look at the European companies' reports and see that it is possible to fit all these categories to the local jurisdiction regulatory requirements. This is my first question. Okay, about your point. First of all, I want to refer to the Scope 3 as one of the main weaknesses of the climate action in the corporate level. Why? Because it's absolutely a stupid measure. When we are building an entire system on the corporate commitments on very weak basis. We have a GHG protocol that was developed in 2006. My goodness.
Yeah, it makes no sense.
This is stupid. Yeah. And the Scope 3 is a heritage of this stupidity on 2006. If you have a look to the Scope 3, most of the companies we have, most of our footprint in the Scope 3. Chocolate for the news. Yeah. This is completely normal. But the problem is that the metrics that we are using for Scope 3, maybe we need to revisit it and try to make it in a better or more sensitive way. How Acciona is tackling this? We have 47 reduction CO2 in the Scope 3, and we need to tackle that. First of all, we are concerned about the social safeguards of our suppliers, because we need to comply with the social safeguards of our project in the taxonomy alignment, and we are very, very focused on the audit side with different requirements. I think that the new directive for the European Union will solve this problem also in order to apply in every single contract the same conditions. But we are very conscious that we have three problems: concrete, steel, and yellow gear. For these three, only for these three, we have special programs in order to have partnerships, to have pilot experience, in order to have the carbonized concrete, the carbonized steel, or electric heavy machinery. But what is the problem? The problem is it's not available in all the jurisdictions. This is only available for the developed countries and in very specific projects. This is not possible because we have not the critical mass. And I invite also to all the companies that are committed to the net zero to join forces for the specific, very intense in carbon sectors, to join forces in order to have this critical mass to impulse the decarbonization of these sectors. Let me repeat: concrete, steel, and heavy-duty machinery that probably will be not decarbonized before the end of this decade. For us and for our Scope 1 and 3, is this a real challenge?
Yeah. No, it is. And from the point of view of a financial entity, when calculating its footprint on its portfolio and on its participated companies and projects, you compound the lack of sense of some of the definitions of for Scope 3 and supply chain. So it's.
I think it's key that now that we are evolving all the architecture of the decarbonization also with the private companies, to have a look to the metrics that we are using in order to measure what is important. Yeah. That finally we discover a lot of surprises.
I completely agree. Thank you very much, José Luis. Tony, shall we speak a little bit about microfinance? Are you up for it?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So before, let me put you a little bit of context in order for you, to kick and score the goal. Yes. Obviously, BBVA on your microfinance foundation and side. Well, it's one of the pioneers in Spain. I mean, all of those who have worked with you in that respect know firsthand, the great work you have done, particularly in countries such as Latin America and Africa, which are, up to the point today. And we also share with you the idea that microfinance is a powerful instrument in order to bring finance or to make or to tackle the problem of financial inclusion, particularly in Africa. And how does BBVA at large, globally, through its foundation and through your teams, how do you include the green dimension and the social dimension in microfinance to strengthen, the resilience of vulnerable populations in Africa, Latin America, and worldwide?
Well, good point. Well, as I said, we see this as a huge business opportunity. Before making the deep dive in microfinance, which is a key issue, let's say that we have a target, we have a goal to mobilize 300 billion euros from 2018 to 2025 in sustainable finance. 75% is going to climate and environment, and 25% to inclusive growth. And we see that in terms of climate and nature, we see that there are some technologies that they need to scale up. The business case is there. So, but there are also other technologies on those sectors difficult to abate where we have to invest. No, and we are using also our resources not through our lending, but even our equity. We are investing in equity in different funds, in low carbon technologies, carbon capture, in hydrogen, in new materials for building. So all this is happening, no? But coming back to the inclusive growth, well, we understand that this social angle is absolutely critical to have an holistic approach to sustainability. We include here sustainable infrastructure, so access to specific basic services in emerging countries is absolutely critical. Education, health, water and others. So these are something that we have in fact our own internal catalog or taxonomy on social, because we have to develop some standards, no, to ensure that later we comply. And also we have to translate the climate taxonomy, into emerging countries, no. So that's something we are already doing. But beyond that, we have a strong commitment on financial inclusion, no. There is still 1.4 billion people in the world lack access to a bank account, and this is absolutely critical, and to have a responsible access to bank account. And this is where the microfinance institution is there. We founded 16 years ago with an endowment of 200 million euros. Today we are providing microfinance to 2.8 million people in Latin America, especially in Colombia, in Peru, Dominican Republic, and also Chile. And it's impressive. 65% are women. The average loan, $1,300. We have an NPL ratio of around 3.5. So it's a fantastic ratio.
That's below the system.
Yes, even better than the ratio that we may have as a bank. So and 35% on rural areas. And we see this a huge platform to work with the local governments to extend and to ensure that no one is left behind. And also, we are starting to introduce green products also for these small farmers, small entrepreneurs. We have specific initiatives in Colombia and Peru that are ready, providing training to the small farmers how to be more resilient to climate and how to have adaptation. And also in some cases providing insurance, no, to those farmers and others. So we are combining this high-level support to big projects, but also with this work that has to be done at the community level, and to reinforce our role as a committed bank, no?
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Tony. And yes, I agree with most of what have you said. And I was very surprised by the MPLs on the microfinance foundation and the business. It's which proves that it isn't necessarily more riskier than any traditional commercial activity.
It is, well, the foundation is a reference. Members of the ECOSOC at United Nations. We have been recognized by the OECD as the second largest corporate philanthropy institution in the world, beyond Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It's a business case is clear. We are not for profit, but it is sustainable and it's scalable. That's the reason why we are growing and growing more year after year. No?
Fantastic, Tony. The best of luck in that endeavor. My good friends, I would love to continue chatting with Elena, Jose Luis, and Tony, but I don't want to be that fellow-ish because I suspect that you have many items on your agenda for the rest of the day, and I think, if you don't mind, we're going to call it. We're going to put the lead on this session, and please let's give them a hand for the fantastic panel they've just provided us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.